Alrighty, so thank you everyone for coming tonight if you're here live, and thanks to anyone who's watching the recording. So for tonight's webinar, we're going to be talking about powering through sexism. So just a bit, let's see, here we go. So first I'll just introduce myself. So my name's Louise, I'm a tradeswoman empowerment coach, and I'm also a trainer and assessor. I started out in the trades in 2012. When I was 15, I started a heavy vehicle road transport apprenticeship, and I stayed at the workplace. I did my apprenticeship for 4.5 years, so including my apprenticeship. And then I moved to a small business where we serviced farms, so worked on everything there. I then went into a mentoring role for a government-funded program. From there, went into training and assessment. I was working for a company for 2 years, teaching the heavy vehicle and mobile plant course. And at the beginning of this year, I left full-time work to become a life coach and support women going through the trades and women in male-dominated workspaces as a life coach. Cool. All right, so just before we get into it, just a bit of what we're going to go over tonight. So pretty much what we're going to do, we'll talk about how to look after yourself if you're going through sexism, looking at where the sexism's coming from, because in my opinion, it's really important to know kind of like the reason behind it. It kind of will help narrow down how to overcome it and how to confront it. And then we will go through, you know, what to do next if it's not changing, or when it does change, and moving on if we go to a different workplace. And then at the end, I'm going to talk a bit more about what I do with tradeswomen and how I work with people and coach. All right, so the big topic, what is sexism? So a lot of us as women would generally have come across some kind of sexism, whether it's when we were a kid, when I actually saw this thing on Facebook come up today where it was like, you know, the school teacher in a primary school was just like, we need some strong boys to move the chairs, like on the tables. So I was like, oh, that is so simple. Yeah, that happens. And to be honest, I catch myself doing that as well in different volunteering scenarios and working scenarios as well. But pretty much sexism is any stereotyping or discrimination typically against women on the basis of sex. So I shared the post saying the webinar was happening tonight, and I had a male friend comment on the post on Instagram being like, when I was 14, you know, a guy was like bashing me and stuff at work, and I'm like, yeah, you know, I'm not saying that no one else is going through anything hard, but what I'm going to be talking about today is just the comments that are made on the basis of us being women generally by men. So sexism is kind of like, because we all have different boundaries, we all see what we class as sexism slightly differently. We all have a different limit on how much we can take and how much we can handle, and what we pass off as a joke and what we can't take as a joke. That's all personal to us. But there's different things. So it can be as simple as comments. So, you know, things that people say, and, you know, other people around you are just laughing and having a joke, and you're like, I don't think this is okay. When people talk to you differently, so if I do find this a lot with older male colleagues, they tend to talk to you maybe like how they would talk to one of their kids, or like you don't know as much as them, and sometimes it can be, hey Ruby, it can be a bit demoralizing and kind of dismissive as well, in the sense of opportunities as well. So at the workplace, being offered different opportunities. So for me, what that looked like when I was an apprentice is the boys in my apprenticeship year, so in my cohort, there was 5 of us, and I was the only girl and I was the youngest. So for me, the different opportunities kind of look like when we would get opportunities to go out, say with field service. So I was working at Cummins, so at a workshop, and we were a fairly large team. And there were 5 or 6 guys that would do field service work, and they were always in the vans going out to sites. And every now and then a bigger job would come up where they would take an apprentice with them to help them. All the apprentices had been out on field service except for me. And no one asked me if I wanted to go or anything like that. And I ended up having to become friends with one of the field service guys and be like, I really want to have a go. Like, he's like, oh, I don't know if you can do it. Like, you're small, we got to move a lot of stuff. Yeah, so you got to do a lot of stuff, like moving heavy. Like, we had to, I think that day we had to move like 600 liters of oil in and out in 20-liter drums. And he was like, I don't know if you can do it. Like, if you can do this one, then you can do any of the jobs. And I'm like, I really want to give it a go. So he took me, and I managed to prove to him that I did it, but no one had asked me. I had to go and chase that opportunity. And then our favorite one, pay differences. So another example of sexism can be pay differences as well. I found in the trades that a lot of it comes to whoever's friends with the supervisor will then get the pay rises, and then the supervisor doesn't really put that effort in for anyone else who's not their friends. But it can come across at different levels and in different ways, different starting wages. If we're not talking about it at the beginning, we don't really know what's happening later on. There are different things that can happen, but kind of in my experience, they're kind of like the four main ones that come across quite commonly. I'm not saying that they're the four only ones, but there is a lot of things that happen that are good. All right.
Good. All right.
Hey, Jane. Just put yourself on mute.
Oh, thank you. Sorry.
All good. All right. So if you're experiencing sexism, it's not a reflection of your self-worth. So I think that's the biggest thing. Like, we find ourselves internalizing it, wondering what we've done wrong to be treated this way. It can feel like you just, you know, I remember just blaming myself, being like, is anything I ever do going to be enough? Is it ever going to be good enough? Is there any hope for me getting these opportunities easier than just fighting for them all the time? Am I always going to be stared at? You know, are people always going to talk to me differently? What can I do about it? What have I done to do this? And trying to analyze every little move that I make, because I'm trying to control the situation, or like trying to see what I've done or what I can change about myself to move through it. But it's not a reflection of your self-worth. I think that's so important to remember. It doesn't mean yet you're bad at your job. It doesn't mean that you're worthless. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't be doing this work. And sometimes, you know, they can direct it at you, and it can be really hard. Like, I had an old guy once look me dead in the eyes and be like, you don't belong here. And as a 17-year-old, it kind of really goes into your soul. And it wasn't about me. It was about the way that he grew up. And it took me a few years to realize that he would have said that to any woman in any location. It wasn't about me. So people tend to have a distorted image of how they see us and how we do any different action. So then it's not a reflection of what we've actually done. They're seeing what we've done through their lens of all this pretty much unconscious bias, or there might be conscious bias depending on how bad it is. And the thoughts that are going on around your head, it's really important to get them out. I'll talk about that a little bit later. But to change the way that we're thinking so that it doesn't become about us. So something that I used to think was, and still do, is like, I feel sorry for all the amazing things in life that you will miss out on being so small-minded. So instead of making it about you and what you've done wrong, or if you haven't done anything wrong, but instead of telling ourselves that story, it'll be like, I feel sorry for them for being so small-minded. And it really helps reframe what's going on. And it kind of, you know, the dagger that's going towards your soul when they try and say the words gets deflected a little bit. All right. So get support. So one of the main reasons why I'm going through this kind of stuff, like supporting yourself first, is I believe that it's really not spoken enough to look after your mental health along the way. A lot of the time, Liz, when I was 17, I was told I was taking an unemployed man's job. I've heard that one as well. That is, I don't know why they get that. It's like the job application was out, anyone could go for it. But yeah, really looking at mental health before we start looking at the actions, because no matter how many action steps we take, if our mental health is suffering, then it's really hard to put any actions in play. And to be honest, we are ourselves in the situation is the most important part. We need to look after ourselves along the way, because we could go in for battle. I remember just having the thought of, I need to just keep going through this because I need to make it better for the next person. But the process of going through it was really damaging my mental health, and it's taken me a few years to recover from what was a few months. So I think it's really important to make sure that you're mentally healthy and you're mentally supported if you're going through this. So pretty much the thoughts go in, or the comments go in, they swirl around in our head, they get worse and worse, because our brain loves to do that. But we need to let them out. So depending on where you're at, if someone messages me and say they're going through sexual harassment, I make sure that they're mentally healthy first, either by venting to someone, even having a friend who might not be exactly in the same situation, but be like, just sit there, I just need to let this out, like having something like that, seeking professional help. So having a counselor or a psychologist to talk to, or being able to talk to your partner about it. It's really important to get this stuff out of your head, because those comments can just swirl around and around, and it doesn't feel good at all. All right. Yeah. So pretty much from my experience, your health and well-being are the most important things. We want to make sure that we are mentally good so that we can put in the actions with full force and have the full effect. Right. Where is the sexism coming from? So personally, I think that sexism comes from different places in different people. So knowing where it's coming from can really make a big difference on the way that you would target it or go about it. Kind of the conversation that you will have going next. So your next step, like having a look at the person, why they're saying the comments, or thinking why they would be saying the comments, or maybe even asking some people around you, like, what's this person's background? And even some of the comments that they say directly to you can be an indicator of kind of where the comments are going from. So some things is just like, you're just like my ex-wife. Back in my day, women never did this work. In my country, women would never do this. What would you know? You only got this job because you're a girl. The last girl we had did ... So pretty much you've got, the ex-wife comment having the kind of the trauma from a broken marriage or a broken relationship, and then that person painting every woman with that experience that they've had. The back in my day, women never did this was like a culture thing. From growing up in an era or in a family there, women were more housebound, or weren't doing any heavy lifting or technical work. Similar to in my country, women would never do this. That kind of cultural background about what women do and don't do, and the gender roles. What would you know? Kind of thinking that coming from a place of men know more than women, or men know more about a certain topic because it's a more masculine job than women. So that kind of that power dynamic. You only got this job because you're a girl generally comes from a place of jealousy, and they're kind of like, how did they get it? Like, it should have been harder. My mate should have got it, stuff like that as well. And the last girl we had ... It kind of comes from similar to the ex-wife thing, but not so much, like in a different context. Like if they've had a female come through a workplace, a lot of people will then have that one experience with a woman that might not have turned out so well. So she might not have done as well in the workplace as they would have expected, or, you know, in general, it might not have been for her at all. And she left. And then everyone makes stories up about why she left. And then they paint every woman with the brush. So Jane's, I got that one. The men at work think I'm a protected species. You'll never be fired. You were just hired because of your gender, etc. Yeah, that's such a common one, and I like it. Just makes me cringe. Like, and especially because sometimes there's quotas and all that kind of thing is a whole nother thing. We won't talk about that. But we can go on that for a while. So there's a few different spots, like a few different kind of upbringings or experiences that could have happened on typically the man side that could have led to these comments, either thinking that they're okay or that they're necessary to be said. All right. So with some of the more kind of experience-based ones, and even just in general, just having a chat about it and opening up that communication line can really make a difference, especially if kind of with the, like back in my country, back in my day kind of things, I found that talking about it and just having that conversation can really make the world of difference, especially when sometimes, like I've actually had this at World Skills, at the international competition, there was a guy from Latvia there, and he had seen me go through the competition with all the other mechanics, being a mechanic, competing for 4 days. I went back as a volunteer, so this was 2 years later, and a guy from Canada asked me to move a table. And I was like, cool, yeah, but I can move a table. So I went to move a table, and the guy from Latvia come up to me and he's like, no, let me do it. I'm like, mate, it's a plastic table, like it's fine. And he's like, but you, and I'm like, why can't I do it? And he's like, oh, women like never do that kind of work in my country. And I'm like, yeah, but like I'm an adult. I'm not just like a woman. I'm not this pretty little flower just here with arms and legs. And just the way, like he just like literally like a cog turned in his head. You could see in his face is just like, oh, like, yeah, it doesn't make any sense. Why couldn't you move a table? But he had never thought of it that way until I said it to him, like, why do you think I can't move the table? And a lot of them, especially if it's just something that they haven't known any difference, a conversation can be all it needs. It doesn't have to be super formal. And especially with someone like you've built a relationship with in a training sense, so like in a technical sense, if you find that they are making comments that are a bit sexist and they kind of don't even have any recollection, or like it's not like they're attacking you, it's just kind of like a slight, not even a slight comment, just like in their normal vocabulary they say things about women. It can be a lot of that upbringing, and when you call them on it, sometimes it just clicks something in their mind, and it can be that simple. Sometimes it's really just bridging the gap in that cultural difference and showing them how things have changed, and literally you working with them is a way that has changed, and it's really visual for them. All right, then we got kind of the next level up, having a more formal chat. So something we can do is kind of have a more like the kind of the casual chat could be like over lunch or while you're working on a project or something like that. You can step it up a notch. As Amy, I was in work experience in high school at a dealership. The supervisor wouldn't let me touch any of the cars and told me to clean up and give the workshop a female touch. Yeah, the cleaning the workshop thing, like I've had that before. And I was at a contractor site, and my boss had come over to the site to just look up, like just have a check over everything. And the guy who ran the site was like, oh, Louise, you need to go clean up after Matt. And my boss was like, why can't Matt clean up after himself? Why does she need to do it? And the black guy who owned the site was like, oh, because she's the woman. And he's like, dude, she's the engine builder. She's the only one who can build these engines for her. Do you want her to clean up, or do you want her to build engines? And it was kind of like, oh. But yeah, the cleaning thing. Anyway. Oh, good. So we can step it up like a more formal chat rather than something that you'd have like cash over lunch or whatever. You could be like, hey, I want to have a chat about something that's really important with me. I want to have a chat one-on-one with you. So I actually did this with a supervisor once who was talking down to me a lot. So to prepare for something like a more formal chat, you would take notes on the things that had been happening. So, you kind of like, okay, there's something going on here. I need to do something about it. Write down what's being said, what time it was said, what was the context, have like all the kind of facts about it. And then not just have the facts about what you didn't like, but also what you would have liked differently. So it's kind of like when you come to someone with problems, they're kind of a bit defensive, but if you come with problems and then solutions straight after, it kind of leaves that spot to slip the solutions straight in. So having things like, so for my example, when I did it, I had things like, I don't like it when you don't make eye contact with me. You look away when you talk to me. I feel like you talk down to me. I don't like the way that you just kind of stand there and expect me to talk to you and tell you what's going on. It makes me not want to be here. This is why I'm not doing much overtime, because I don't feel valued. I would like it if you, said, hey, Louise, what are you doing on this job, rather than just standing there. So coming in with the solution straight away. And to be honest, that only worked for a few days with him, because this guy was kind of one of those ones where he wasn't going to change. But for some people, if they are looking at developing themselves as a leader, especially I find this really with like young leaders and people who are fresh into leadership roles, they might not know how their communication comes across. So someone who's looking at growing as a leader will definitely take this feedback on and use it to grow their leadership style. So having that conversation can really make a big difference on how they treat you as well. Giving them, what you didn't like, why you didn't like it, and what they could do differently. That kind of what you would have rather them do or say is really important to bridge that gap and kind of get them to change their behavior. When you're having the conversation, it's good to put your feelings in there, but keep it short and sweet with the feelings. So kind of just, this is the fact. It made me feel undervalued. It made me feel not valued. And this is what I would like you to do different. With some of the guys and like supervisors and stuff like that, sometimes if you can get too deep into your feelings, especially if it's something that really hurt you, I know it's really easy to kind of get into that feeling and get really upset about it. But you'll start to lose them, especially if it's kind of in a position where you're trying to have authority as well. They might see it as a weakness. So having your feelings in there, kind of have your feelings in there, is really important for them to acknowledge that you do have feelings, and that's what they were. But if you get too lost in it, you'll lose them. And it'll be, the transition between problem and solution won't be quick enough, and they'll get lost. They won't remember what the problem is if you burst into tears. So try and avoid that, even though sometimes it's easier said than done. All right, opportunities. So when things are coming up and opportunities to do harder tasks, opportunities to deal with bigger customers, opportunities to do things on your own rather than supervised, it can slip by you, especially if people are wanting someone who they think could handle it and they have that unconscious bias towards women. It can really get them to skip over you as someone who can do the extra work. Asking is probably the biggest first step. Put yourself out there and ask. Be like, I want to do it. Especially so with me, when I saw people like the other apprentices going out into the vans, I'd be like, so next time, can I go? Next time, can I go? And like just being like, can I go next? And asking again and again to make sure that I was always front of mind and trying to push through that unconscious bias barrier in the field service supervisor's head, to be like, I'm here and I'm keen. And then there's different ways to go about it. So for me personally, I went about that situation by becoming friends with one of the field service people, and then they asked for me and in the world of male-dominated industries, another man's voice tends to have more power. So having him ask for me to go was what allowed me to actually break that barrier. So you can ask directly to the person who you're supposed to be asking, or ask indirectly. So ask for someone who has a good relationship with the supervisor to then allow you to get that opportunity. And sometimes if that doesn't work, if it's something you can just do, so if you're just asking permission to do a little bit extra on a job or to help someone on a bigger job, and so this kind of is a bit of a judge your scenario kind of one. So if it's something that you finished all your other work and you're like, oh, maybe I could just draft up this thing, or maybe I could just, start working on this truck, or, maybe I've finished all my work and I'll just go ask this guy if I can help him, rather than going through the process. So for me, what that looked like is doing all my apprentice duties in the morning quicker, and then having an extra half an hour or something like that before I was formally put on a job to go and suss out some other job and be like, hey, what are you doing? And then that person would then ask for me to be allocated to them because I already knew what was going on the job. So sometimes you can just do things if it's safe, and if you think it's a good idea that you have that opportunity to just be like, I'm just going to prove that I can do it, and I'm just going to show them I can do it. So there's a few different ways to go about that, as well as then you can also pull out your training contract if you're an apprentice, and supervisors and the workplace is supposed to train you as well. So that's actually in the contract between you, the employer, and the training provider as well, that the employer is supposed to give you the opportunities to train. All right, pay difference. So pay difference is kind of a bit of a touchy subject for some people, I know, and depending on whether you've experienced or not, or if you know that you've experienced or not, because I think that's one of the biggest things, is that a cultural thing for some reason is to not talk about money. So a lot of the times we won't know if we are getting paid more or less than our co-workers because it's not really spoken about. The first thing to probably do if you are suspecting there's a pay difference is to actually ask the people around you what you're getting paid, what they're getting paid, and that kind of thing, to actually know. There's power in knowing. And especially with the pay situation, having that conversation about money with your co-workers and starting to make that normal in the workplace is the first step to kind of leveling out the playing field as well. If you do find out that you're getting paid differently or paid less to someone who is doing the same work than you, work out what the difference is, work out if they actually do. Many contracts prohibit this though. Yeah. So yeah, Jane just said in the chat that some contracts prohibit this. So that is also, even that line in itself is also an indicator that there might not be fair pay between people going on as well. So if someone's telling you not to talk about your pay, there's probably something wrong there. Yeah. So pretty much if you do work out that there's a difference, work out what your tasks are they the same? And then keep on going from there. It's one thing as women, there's a study on it, there's been heaps of studies on it about how we don't ask for pay rises because we feel like things like that need to be given to us and they're not there for us to take. But they are. They are. And I think it's more of a mentality shift for you if you are in this process of working out that your pay is different. It's really important that you know that you are worth exactly the same, and it has a lot to do with your thoughts about the situation. So everyone will have different thoughts coming up about why they're being paid different and how much harder they need to work to then be seen as equal. But realistically, you write the stuff down on a piece of paper, you send it an email, you say, can I have a meeting with you? And be like, this is the law. And I know it's easier said than done, but a lot of the time, once it's pointed out, it will get changed. Because a lot of the time, this is something that comes up on employers' kind of profiles if they're in a, so there's a few different sites, I can't remember the name of them, but they put a rating on them on how inclusive they are. So people can actually look on these sites and see how inclusive a workplace is to see if they want to work there. And stuff like this, stuff like pay differences and different policies and stuff that they have affect that score. So if you're in a workplace where they're looking at getting some kind of star rating for diversity and all that kind of thing, they will be pretty quick to jump on giving you equal pay. As well as a lot of the times, employers are generally underpaying people until they notice. And then when they notice, they're like, cool, okay, here you go. So that can also be happening as well with the pay situation. And once you bring it up, they'll be like, cool, here, we're waiting for you to ask, here's the money. So generally, you don't tend to get too much pushback once you do ask. Awesome. All right. So they're the few different steps that I have. I know every situation is different and it might be a mixed match of different things going on, as well as I know there are some things that I haven't covered in too much detail. But pretty much the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So if you've got someone who's stubborn and is not going to change the way that they think about women, and it's really starting to affect you and your mental health, and it doesn't look like it's getting any better, and you're trying to heal yourself and move on from it, and it's not working, it's time to leave. Because like I said at the beginning, you are the most important part of this situation. There's always going to be another job. There's always going to be a different workplace. It's not the end of the world to leave a job because of sexism. I know it's something that we tend to not want to do. I know I've been in the position being like, I just need to push through. Like, I just need to, like, it'll get better. It'll get better. And then, you know, you sit in your car at the end of the day and you cry on the way home. I don't recommend putting yourself through that for too long. If you are crying on the way home, probably like more than half the week, you need to do something about that. So pretty much there's nothing wrong with actually just leaving after you give it a crack at trying to fix it and trying to make a change. There's no shame at all in leaving and moving on when you need to. Most of the time it might be a push. Generally it's an upgrade. Once you find a workplace, you go to the next workplace, you've got better tools, you've learned a lot, and you can just hit the ground running again with more experience. It's generally an upgrade. So that's really important. Put yourself first, move on when you need to. Don't laugh it off. One thing that I hate when I hear girls say, oh yeah, you know, but they just pick on me and it just means that I'm included and it just means that I'm one of the boys. And I'm like, no, girl, no. Don't laugh it off. I know sometimes it can come as a shock, especially if something's like an offhanded comment and you're just like, ha, 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 ha. But if it does bother you, draw that line straight up. It's so much easier to fix something right at the beginning and nip it in the bud, because what happens is if you laugh it off every time, it'll slowly get worse and worse. They'll slowly just test the barriers more and more. And then it'll feel like then it becomes to that point where it's really hard to turn back, because the guys in the workshop or the guys in the environment might just be like, but you were fine with it yesterday and you've been fine with it for the last 6 months. Why is it bothering you now? And that's something that I've heard a few times. And it's really hard to then change the mentality back to, you know, this is my line, when you've let them cross it so many times. So if something does bother you and you laugh it off and you're like, wait a second, that wasn't right. Next time it comes up, try and be like, hey, that's not on. I'm not keen for that. I don't like that joke. And even just recognizing that it's not okay. Because I know a lot of the times we try and keep quiet to fit in and continue laughing it off. But it's not helping anyone. It's definitely not helping you in the process, especially if it is something that's bothering you and you're just trying to convince yourself that it's not bothering you. Little things like that are the things that can really seep into our mental health and then affect our confidence later on. It's just those thoughts that we're pretending we're not having. The ones that you pretend that you're not having are the worst ones. They'll come back and bite you in the ass. So don't do that. So if you do notice something's bothering you, own it. It's bothering me. What am I going to do next? All right. So if you have moved on from sexism, if you've left a workplace, if the guy who was being a total dick has left and, now you're moving forward with everything, you got to watch that you're not using your time and energy to be ready for battle again. Sometimes we can find ourselves looking for any little sign that it might be happening again because we're on the defensive. And it takes up a lot of energy, and we can hold a lot of that resentment and that hurt inside of us. You might look at something, someone might be having a bad day and maybe have a one-off snap, and then they're totally fine and dandy every other day. But that one snap, you'd be like, yep, they hate me. Sexism is happening again. And it does take up a lot of energy, and it just kind of gets us really doubting ourselves and, being like, shit, it's going to happen again. And it's really important to catch ourselves. We got to, clean slate, new workplace. You know what it feels like if something is happening, then deal with it when it actually does. Sometimes we start looking for signs that aren't actually there, and a workplace that could be really good, we then make it in our head not great. And it can be really hard to do, especially if you've gone through a really tough situation, and especially if it's been happening for a really, really long time and then you left and you kind of don't know anything different. It's really hard to then move on, but it's really important to start catching yourself if you see yourself making up signs or, just expanding any little thing that's being done. And then replaying the situation over and over in your head. So that, the stories, the repetition, it just happens, and the stories just keep going and going and going around in our head. Feeling the emotion of what has happened is really important, and processing it. But wallowing in it doesn't really help anyone. I heard this really good quote on a podcast once. It was, you're allowed to have a pity party, but you can't have a pity festival. You have to take the tent down at the end of the night. And I was like, yes, that is perfect. I'm going to tell everyone. But it's really important to feel the emotion. If you were pissed off, be pissed off. That's totally okay. But don't be pissed off forever because it's not going to help you. Let the feelings out. If you're upset, give yourself a good cry. If you feel like, I know sometimes like I can feel like an emotional breakdown kind of like happening. Like I'm like, it's going to happen any minute now. And if I know I've got something big coming on, I would just like watch a sad movie, because apparently that there's also a scientific thing behind that, is like, if you've got repressed emotion and you're watching like a movie or something happens and it triggers, like, you're watching a sad movie and, someone passes or someone's had a breakup or something, it will then trigger all the emotions that you have repressed that are similar to that. And you'll come up and you'll deal with it. So there is a bit of science behind that. But if you do feel like there's emotion down there that you're not really processing, whack on a sad movie, let it out. Because that can help us process and then move on. Alrighty, so we've gone over everything. So just a quick recap on what we went over. So first things first, look after yourself. You're the most important part in this situation. And you need to be well to be able to implement all the actions to the best of your ability to get the best result out of them. Step 2, work out where the sexism is coming from. So we went through a few of the places of the reasons why someone could be sexist towards you or towards people around you. And it really helps decide what your next step is going to be, working out where it comes from. And then take action. We had a few different ways to take action depending on where the sexism was coming from and what the situation was. So then take action. All right, thank you guys so much for listening. I really hope you got a lot out of tonight's webinar. Thank you for being here live. And if you're watching the recording, I'm so glad you have learned all these things that I will have picked up all these things that I have taught. I have a Facebook community, Tradeswomen Owning Their Power, where stuff like this gets shared on the daily in small little snippets. And it's a really, really supportive community to share and discuss anything that might be going on in your work life. So I really appreciate, or I would really love for you guys to join that community because I believe you will be so supported in it. All right, so that is the end of the learning for this webinar. And now I'm just going to quickly talk about how to work with me. I work with women one-on-one, mainly women. I work with women one-on-one through a 4-month program, where we meet once every fortnight for an hour to talk about anything that you need to talk about and make a plan for what is specific to you. So if you're a tradeswoman and you are looking at building your confidence, if you're looking at making that leap from tradie to leader, if you are wondering what your next step is, if you just want to be a better tradie as well, if you think your skills have room to grow, but you're not quite sure what to do, I would love to support you through that. And we can do that in the program. So the way that we work together is, if you want to, in the link below, in the description box below, there'll be a link to my Calendly where you can book in a half-hour chat with me just to see where you're at and to make sure it's the right fit for coaching, and just to start making a bit of a plan to get in there. From there, we'll then book in some time. We'll book in your day, and then we'll go from there. We'll catch up every fortnight. And the cost of that program is $1497. I do have payment plans available. So if that is something that interests you, or you have any more questions, feel free to reach out to me. I would love to hear from you, and I would love to watch you grow. Thank you so much for listening, and have an awesome day. Keep being your awesome selves.